Okay, perfect. Well, thanks everyone for coming. So the title of my talk is called "Probably Approximately Queer," and it's the nicest machine learning pun I could come up with, and I apologize for that in advance. And this is going to be a very personal talk about essentially why I decided to embrace uncertainty in my own queerness, but also in the context of my personal experience. Just say this disclaimer because I'll be touching in things like race and cultural diversity and cultural backgrounds. And I'm not saying here that what I'm gonna tell you applies to everyone. It's just what felt better for me as in the context of my personal experience. So just to give some background, I was born in Brazil and I did my undergrad and master's there. And then I moved to the UK to do my PhD, spent 4 years in the UK. And then in 2016, I moved to Australia to do a postdoc. And I had was for 2.5 years. And then I got a lectureship position at University of Melbourne. And that's been 2 years now. Oh, sorry. No, 1 year. Uh, My pronouns are he, him, and they, them. And the reason why I chose these pronouns are going to be quite clear through this talk. And that's pretty much the whole, my whole talk was pretty much driven by why I chose these pronouns for me. So why I'm him, him? Because I'm gay. And that's my sexual orientation. And that's one of the things I identify with. And why I'm they, them? Because I have no idea what my gender identity is. If I have to put like a label right now, I would say that I am agender. But there's a question mark at the end, and that question mark is quite important because it's really the I don't know would be the best answer to this question. Now, here's the thing: if I identify myself as gay, does it mean that I actually identify myself as a man? Because a gay person is a man that is sexually or romantically attracted to other men or other male present people. Well, so here's the thing. Like when I started to question things like especially my identity, I end up running into like a bunch of theories that came like from gay slash lesbian slash queer studies. And at that time, I was not really like diving into what was really happening into academic spheres or personal experiences from queer people. And it was the only thing I had access to was very much what was popping out of the bubble and coming out to the mainstream sphere. And one of the things that came out, I clearly remember one of the things that came out to the mainstream sphere was the genderbread person. And I don't really remember when this popped out, but it was at the time it was kind of heralded as like a really nice picture of what is the difference between gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, and so on. And people will say like, this is great. This is a great tool for other non-queer people to understand or what our experiences are, and so on, so on, so on. And when I look at that the first time, I was like, I'm not sure. I was like, there's something here. And at the time, I didn't know exactly what was the problem with this. And now I understand that even this is even though this is okay as a first step, it really like doesn't capture like many other confounders or aspects, like for instance like the cultural background you're coming from. In particular, this is very westernized, right? And even though I'm still like a white Western people, I'm not like uh, I'm a Latin American person. So just that, just by coming from a cultural background that is not exactly the same where this came from, it was already it sounded like something weird to me. And the main thing here that was weird and is the split between identity, expression, and orientation. And I think for a very long time, I thought that I was completely different from all other queer people because the discourse I heard for so long was that these were three different things that should be defined separately. And for me, it's not like that. For me, these three things talk to each other all the time, and it's really hard for me to split between them. So, how did I came up with that? Okay, so let's step back for a bit and talk about something that's way easier and much less complicated, which is race and cultural identity. And of course, I'm being sarcastic here. So, how society reads me? It reads me as a white person. And this is crystal clear on the number of privileges that I have as a white person. I mean, this is absolutely no doubt about that. How do I culturally identify? Is I culturally identify as a Latino? And unlike my gender identity, my cultural identity as a Latino person is very strong and very ingrained in me. And it affects many aspects of my life, from the interactions I have in particular, the interactions I had in Britain and now in Australia. So, and so it is an identity, but it's already affected the way I express myself. So this is already a point where identity expression, it's like, this is not this separate things. So if I have to say one word, one sentence about my experience as a white Latino is that I usually have all the white privilege, but I lose some of it as soon as I start to speak, and people notice that I have an accent. Uh, and I definitely don't. I'm still very privileged in the sense of like uh, uh, many of the major aggressions that people of color suffer. But for me, what the kind of privilege that I lose is more on the level of microaggressions. And a particular one that's very common among gay Latinos is the sexualization. I've heard countless times people assuming that I was ready for sex because I was Brazilian. So, in other words, in respect to my personal experience, the separation between race and cultural identity feels a little bit arbitrary. So, if I have to put a label, I would put a label that joins both things at the same time. I, would, I wouldn't say that I am white and Latino in a compositional way. I would say that I am white Latino as a joint, not fully compositional term. And this is what feels more appropriate to me. Because for me, it encompasses all the privilege that I have as a white person, but also some of the privilege that I lose when people notice that I'm not, I am actually come from a Latino background. And this was when I first realized that the separation, the separation of race and the cultural background was very fuzzy to me, like and foggy. Maybe the separation between sexual orientation and gender identity and expression could also not be appropriate for me. So maybe what I am is this joint label, gay and gender, together, not 100% compositional. And at first I thought I was the only one with these kind of thoughts. But then during like my journey, I had like two discoveries slash epiphanies that helped me frame myself a little bit better. And the first one is what I found about it's about this term called gay masculinities. So gay masculinities is essentially the idea of having gay as an identity and not as an orientation necessarily, not split for orientation. And think think concepts like leather culture or bear culture among many others, very common among gay men. So uh, the idea of gay masculinities is a concept that's been studied in like queer studies for decades. I mean, it's something that's been there for since like 70s, 80s, maybe probably actually much earlier than that. But probably, I think the first studies, academic studies, came from the 70s. I think, if I'm not mistaken. But it's just a whole idea of having a it's much more just okay, a man that it's romantically and sexually attached to a man. There's more than that. There's an identity, there's an expression of that. The idea of gay masculinities, they do not, I don't think they really apply to me. And some of them can even feel a bit outdated to me in our current days. But it did provide me an example where the borders between orientation and identity were blurred. So this is the first time I saw like, okay, the separation is not that clear. And this is actually being studied before. There's something here. So that was my first like discovery in that sphere. My second one came with this person called Linda Quebrada, which is a Brazilian singer-songwriter. And she defines herself as a gender terrorist, which I think it's a great name. In 2018, Lynn released a documentary about her life called Bicha Travesti. Travesti is a really difficult name to translate, but the English version of this that was called Tranifag. That, and that's the English title. That's the title for the English version of the movie. So Lynn uses she/her pronouns, and she identifies as trans, but she also identifies as a fag. And if you watch the movie, that's very clear. She calls herself both all the time. And just as a side note, you should all watch this movie, especially if you want to learn about what does it mean to be queer in Latin America, especially in Brazil. So this movie for me is a good example between like where this again the separation between orientation and identity expression gets shattered, but now in particular in a Latin American and in this case in a Brazilian context. So again, it was something that was like, wow, okay, I think this is more touching more into the way I feel. Because if Lynn can proudly identify herself as a tranny fag, maybe I can also identify myself as a gay agender person. And I take the genderbread person and just throw it in the bin. And that's it. And that is my label. Now, I still have the question mark there. And if I have to be very honest, the experience and concepts and these discoveries, they did not solve my uncertainties and my anxieties about my gender identity, but they did show me that I was not alone in having them. And in particular, the separation between identity, expression, orientation that feels really arbitrary and artificial to me. I was not the only one who was having trouble with that. And that resonated me a lot. It resonated with me a lot. Being more comfortable with this made me realize that some of the answers I was looking for were actually right in front of me. And this is the last bit I want to talk about. Last year, I had my job talk at Melbourne Uni, and it was all about my work on uncertainty and NLP. And this was the last slide. Essentially, I was in job talks, you usually have to come up with a research agenda and what's your research is based on. And I finished my talk saying that in order to do NLP, we need to embrace uncertainty over all aspects of an NLP pipeline. I always work on uncertainty and NLP since my PhD days. And since then, it's been one of my research pillars. Even these days, my work is very much driven by modeling uncertainty. And I believe in that because human language, we all know that it's not just full of ambiguity and nuance, but it's even defined by the presence of ambiguity and nuance. So if I have those beliefs about human language, which is one of the things, if not the thing that makes us humans, if I believe that this thing is just full of ambiguity, full of uncertainty, why should I have trouble embracing uncertainty and ambiguity about myself? And when I realized that, I even felt a little bit of an hypocrite about being an hypocrite with myself. Like, I can't just tell that the human language is full of like uncertainty and try to put myself in a label. So, in other words, I learned to embrace it, and I learned to be in peace with that. And I'm not saying here that you should not try to find answers for your questions or anxieties you have, but I think you should treat this journey with a little bit more serenity, because uh, I mean, being ambiguous and being uncertain is not just part of being queer, it's part of being a person. Thank you.